All right. Welcome, everybody. Anthony Robinson here, founder and CEO of ShipScience, the Retail Control Tower podcast. First, an inaugural episode. We're here to talk about all things logistics, especially pertaining to enterprise shippers. Our goal is to try and bring to light things that maybe aren't as publicly talked about and just give folks in the enterprise shipping space a place to go to get content and to learn from others who are feeling and living the pain that is enterprise logistics. First episode here, very, very excited to have Tanner Morley from HelloFresh joining me here today. Hey, Tanner, thanks for joining.
Hey, good afternoon, Anthony. Appreciate you having me.
Of course. Awesome. Thanks for being here. Do you mind taking maybe like a minute or two and just give everybody a background, what you do at HelloFresh, how you got where you are, and obviously why this is an important topic for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So high level, I'm about 25 years in the logistics space. I started out in warehousing, courier. I spent some time in rail and intermodal. I most recently joined HelloFresh about 4 years ago, and I manage final mile parcel delivery for a perishable product across a diversified mix of carriers. So keeping the performance high for our customers and making sure that we're doing it financially responsibly.
Awesome. Yeah. And that obviously comes with a lot of challenges. And that's really why we're here today. Um, main topic that I wanted to discuss with you is carrier strategy, service tiers, and how to go from a business with maybe if you're sole sourcing your package volume through a national carrier, graduating from that to a distributed network across multiple carriers. Obviously, lots of complexity comes with that. There's lots of things to think about, both in terms of operational complexity, service delivery, like all of those things together. Talk to me about how you look at structuring your carrier portfolio across a variety of carriers, and like what are the variables that go into that for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting question. And ultimately, I think that it's a big, broader shift in the final mile parcel space, and not just for enterprise shippers or parcel shippers or perishable at this point, but it keeps moving down the supply chain to where even people that would be traditionally considered, small volume shippers and are looking at diversification and like building a carrier network that can help strategic objectives. So HelloFresh specifically is like a very large shipper in the perishable space. We move a lot of boxes every week, and we do it under some pretty tight constraints, just trying to get, foodstuffs to people's doorstep on a day that they can predictably rely it will be there to feed their families. It creates a pretty tight set of constraints for exactly what success looks like. And so our carrier mix is all based on reliability, consistency, but there's an underlying thread of diversification in way of like ensuring that a customer doesn't have a delivered not received package, that they're able to get special instructions, that they're able to get the photo proof of delivery that they would expect. So some of that stuff is the second tier of what we look at, but overall it's, can we get a box there? Can we get it there quickly? And can we do it at a price that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. When you're looking at, I know you at this point are using a variety of last mile carriers in the US. And I think there's obviously like complexity to a fully structured, well built out network. How do you think about like an incremental carrier, like adding an incremental carrier to your network? Like, what are the things that you're looking at? How do you like balance the complexity of one more carrier versus the benefit maybe of having somebody else there to that maybe has potentially higher service standards? How do you validate that? Like, what are the things that are going through your mind when you are looking at a new carrier?
Yeah, I mean, there's a trade-off in every decision, right? And so you're looking at balancing the cost of adding another carrier, and there are some hidden ones around the way. Things like you don't know exactly how a carrier's performance is going to come in, despite all of the research that you can do externally as a non-shipper with that carrier. So there's risk in quality. There's unknowns as far as what it'll do to the mix and the allocation of the boxes you have now. There's something to do, some validity to the conversation around affinity and people get better with time. And so having a consistent mix can improve results. It can also lead to rigidity that becomes a risk when there's disruptions in your supply chain, whether it be supply disruptions or, random fuel surcharge increases or some of the other things that can pop up. So you're always looking at that trade-off. Adding another carrier, there's reasons that you might look at it. Lack of redundancy in a specific area is a big one for us. Like if you don't have multiple options to service that same box, your exposure to risk increases. And there's a very definite cost to that. It may not be an immediate cost, but that's a cost that you don't want to be exposed to. Very heavy consideration and mitigation. There's also the cost of leverage. Like if you overexpose yourself or over complicate your network, you lose some of that relationship value that you have with
Sure.
working with a smaller set of partners.
That makes sense. So when you're looking at a new carrier potential, let's just say new carrier pops up and they knock on your door. I'm curious, like actually how this would happen with you. Like, are you actively searching, or are you like getting carriers hitting you up saying, "Hey, like we can support your volume"? So that's maybe one point to dwell on for a second. But I'm also curious how you would think about the implementation. Are you doing that in a way? You mentioned redundancy. Are you like testing carriers as a redundant source, like backing up some of your primary carriers volume, or like how do you like work through onboarding a new carrier, and how do you think about that?
Sure. I think I'd flip it back to that last statement I made around, relationships. And we at HelloFresh have a very robust, resilient carrier network. We've got some really well established, like solid partnerships. And so it's like incumbent on my role to have a Rolodex of carriers that exist out there. Like I'm always talking to new carriers, learning what coverage profiles look like and understanding capabilities. But adding a carrier is definitely not a willy-nilly type of a situation. We're very diligent about making sure that we have a right fit, both culturally and the way that we operate. We have like we alluded to at the beginning, our package profile is very high level of requirements to be considered as a successful delivery. So we definitely do constantly look at where the weaknesses in our network are. Even the most resilient network has opportunities. There's going to be areas where, you know, even historical strengths. This region has always been a real high performer. We've got a solid partner. We're happy with the rates. And, over the last several quarters, we'll see the performance start to slide. And despite the best efforts of, performance improvement through a specific carrier partner, you may not get the results that you want. Or a big macroeconomic shift happens, something changes, and all of a sudden a partnership that was working really well for the strategy for a really long time maybe isn't anymore.
Makes
So
sense.
whether it's that slow shift or a big, you know, seismic shift, there's a lot of things that could cause you to look for an alternate partner.
Got it. And I'm imagining that like there's a trust but verify sort of like situation that goes on when you onboard a new partner. It's probably not, hey, we're gonna like dump 100% of the eligible volume to this particular carrier right on our first pass. Like it's going to be a testing and test and verify like performance, and then maybe like ramp volume over time as you validate that they're doing what they said they were going to do. Like how do you think about that, and is that accurate?
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting because there are metrics and KPIs, there's scorecards that are, externally sourced and published. So you can find information about carrier performance just from, broader analysts, but it never will exactly match your use case. So like when you first start vetting a potential, partner, there are some boxes that you just have to check. Like, do you offer the service type and the coverage that we need? Are we able to integrate with you? Can I manifest my shipments through the platform that I'm using? And can we receive tracking events back in the format that we want? Most carriers have basic functionality in those areas now. So after those
Yeah.
boxes are checked, then you start that due diligence and you go through reading the reviews. You can look at the broader analytics scorecards, but you can also do some like Reddit cruising and reading reviews and see what the overall sentiment is from just the broader population base that's receiving service from that carrier. But when it comes right down to it, like, yeah, the only way that you're going to get a solid understanding of how they'll perform for your specific package profile is by giving them some volume. So structured testing.
Yeah. Okay. So you're doing some structure. That's really interesting to me that you're looking at Reddit. I mean, obviously, like there's so many anecdotal stories about like negative like carrier experiences that are running around out there on some Reddit forums. But I do
Yes.
agree that like you can sort of just as a sampling of volume of those things get a feeling for how frequently they're occurring across certain carriers and otherwise. But yeah, it's interesting to sort of like marry that with the actual data that's coming in from some tests that you do internally. Good. Yeah, I think that's super interesting. When you're looking at like capacities, like this is the big thing that's come up recently is like carriers. This was something that probably like pre-COVID didn't really even exist. Like carriers weren't talking about like, hey, like we're at capacity. You need to be like rolling volume to another carrier. It's like counterintuitive from a supply and demand standpoint. But obviously this is part of the narrative now. Peak occurs, carriers have caps. They want you guys to be not overloading or overstraining their networks. How are you thinking about carrier capacities and sort of like distribution during that and also like the associated operational risk that occurs during peak these days?
Really good question. And it's actually one of those things that in the supply chain, especially parcel, it's a never ending conversation. Like it's a constant year round review and planning because every peak period brings its own challenges and they're often unique. If we look at the last period, we had like pre-tariff concerns and stocking up of inventories across all of different areas of the supply chain that you wouldn't have expected. You have winter storms that can pop up, and one year it's fantastic, and your service area has no impact from weather, and another you have a crazy impact, or you have the long peak seasons where you have an extra couple of days between Thanksgiving and Christmas versus a very compact, constrained peak season where you lose 6 extra days and it's a big impact. A lot of boxes squeezed into a shorter period of time. All of those conversations are continuously ongoing, but it's a really important aspect of the conversation when you're vetting that carrier. You want to understand what their strategies are, how they plan for peak, and what their willingness to secure your volume is. And ultimately, it's the less glamorous side of the conversation, but contracts are one of those things that really do define and secure those relationships. And so if it's an area where you know you're a shipper that has an influx of capacity requirements during that time, like you want to have that added to a contract to make sure that you're
Yeah.
protected.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're really in active conversations with your carriers pretty frequently and regularly to talk about what's coming up. How are the carriers looking at, their seasonal peak and performance, and then also sort of like pairing that with your own forecasts and projections, and then really trying to get to common ground there, and then ultimately memorializing that into a contract. Like, is that sort of valid?
That is, yeah, well put. And ultimately, it's different for every shipper. Like how that
Yeah,
happens for us, we can't have a downtime. Like we can't turn off shipments for a period of time. Like our customers are a subscription service. So it's
totally.
it's a very big hot button topic to make sure that we have capacity when we need it, where we need it. But it's even actually outside of just the peak periods. You'll have expansion into new markets and things with a carrier partner, making sure that they have the capacity to support the service levels that you need. It's the same conversation. So it branches out from there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting to me because like putting the shoe on the other foot, and this part that I think a lot of people don't talk about, it's trying to be, in the carrier's position, trying to manage like I'm talking to Tanner at HelloFresh over here to like manage what's going to be coming up with them. And then I also have like thousands of other customers or hundreds or whatever with the regional, but like, lots of other voices in the conversation also trying to plan and you're trying to like manage all of these things. So that maybe is why having those conversations and doing those planning events is very helpful for the carrier, and surprises can be problematic for them because they're trying to manage their commitment to so many companies, and those commitments obviously are very important.
Yeah, and it's a piece that a lot of people don't think about. The partnership is a two-way street. Like, yes, they're a vendor and they're providing a service, but the better that you can help them be successful, the more positive outcome you're going to get from that relationship. And peak is a very real like supply and demand, like you mentioned earlier, is true, but there's only a finite amount of resources. So if they have X number of delivery hours that they can put on the road across all of their various outlets, and they're doing S&OP planning to figure out exactly where they're going to allocate those resources to as well.
Exactly. No, it's super interesting. I think it kind of relates to the redundancy topic that we mentioned earlier too. Like, how do you? I mean, I know that obviously, like, there's a varying degree of diversification and redundancy that everybody's going to be thinking about. But what in your mind is the risk of a single sourced network? Like like in your, like, where are like the pitfalls of that? And I think obviously like UPS and FedEx, USPS, these are big businesses with very complex networks. They have obviously a lot of reliability built in, but where's the downside of sort of relying on that as a single source network?
Well, and they do like there's benefits to that. If you look back at the simplicity argument, the having a single partner that like John is my driver that picks up at 5 o'clock every day and he's going to come by my dock and off goes the product. That consistency is a perk. It's a benefit that we've talked about, but it's a perk that comes at a pretty high cost. Those networks are all in the at the very moment like reliable partners, but that reliability comes on there's a couple of trade-offs. I think that the biggest one I'd put like, and I don't want to talk too terribly about them because they do serve a huge need, like they're key and critical part of a lot of supply chains around the world, but they are a known quantity. They are large and they manage to, the law of large numbers. There are acceptable failures that will happen all the time. And a lot of times when you try to dive into them as a smaller shipper, even an enterprise, middle-sized, larger shipper, the answers that you get back are, we have failures in our network. So as a
Yeah,
perishable shipper, it's funny, like a lot of times the conversation is around, yeah, the known quantity, you get higher quality when you go with that route versus like a smaller regional. And we found that to be counterintuitive there or opposite of our experience. Those
yeah.
networks are not able to provide the highest levels of service and they come at a premium cost because you're, supporting all of that infrastructure that they've built out over the years. So it's a
That makes
trade-off.
sense. It is a trade off, and I also think that I think a lot of smaller businesses are kind of handcuffed to a degree because maybe they don't meet the average daily pickup volume requirements of regionals. They don't have the bandwidth to manage a complex network, so they kind of have to just go with a single solution where they can. So I think there are opportunities out there for shippers like that now. There's like up and coming tech like aggregation platforms like Tusk and other things like that, where it's like, hey, you can throw your volume and they'll manage the back end of the regional network for you. But yeah, I think that has been one of the arguments I think for like small to medium sized businesses who are trying to self fulfill potentially and not going through a 3PL. It's like they can't handle the complexity, so they have to go through a single source
Yes.
network. But at some point you can graduate as you grow and have the expertise and the domain in house to do it. And obviously, it seems like there's benefit to doing that
Yeah, definitely. And like at this level, when you're an enterprise shipper and sending more boxes out, you have more control over that diversification. But to your point, like Tusk and Grip and their barrier to entry is a lot lower than it used to be. So a lot of people think that they are hamstrung or, like the only way that we can feasibly manage this is to just call one partner, but it's a little bit more accessible than it has been in the past.
for sure. Yeah, and there are a lot. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to just keep up with is how many final mile carriers there are out there. The network, the landscape is changing so quickly. There's aggregators, there's people that are like managing their entire network end to end, and there's folks that are just piggybacking to the last mile. Like it's hard to keep up with the changes. What do you do, or how are you keeping your ear to the pavement on this stuff?
Yeah, it's one of the benefits of being in the role that I'm in because I get like I'm as odd as it sounds a logistics nerd anyway, and so the movements in overall parcel delivery space are something that are not really making headlines in a lot of places. But you get the couple that'll crack occasionally, like who's shipping for Amazon now and where's a hub closing. But there are a lot of like more subtle shifts and there are a lot of carriers that have entered the market. There's a broader consolidation almost happening right now. It seems like the pandemic was a catalyst. Like it exposed capacity issues, but the overall total parcel volume is still increasing. Like we haven't seen
Yes.
that trend reverse. So there are more and more people ordering things to their houses and places of business. And yet the established USPS, UPS, FedEx carrier share is decreasing. Like the total number of parcels that they are delivering isn't on that same upward trajectory. So somebody's delivering those boxes, and finding out who those people are is always an interesting feat. There's an
Totally.
interesting mix too. There's the big national carriers, there's the small wholly owned regionals, and then there's an asset light that is a model that has come into play a lot more of late, where people are leasing resources and finding ways to do parcel delivery. We have found that that's not a fantastic fit for our perishable model, because we don't have a whole lot of control over an asset light. But for retail shipments and things, it can give you a broader reach, and you can still get packages delivered at a really reasonable rate, and a relatively high on-time delivery performance that at least is coming close to what those national networks can hit.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I think like part of the, part of the one of the variables, I guess, when you're looking at potentially adopting a new carrier is what's the cost benefit. So there's obviously a lot of the guys that have come into the market recently have come in playing on price, where it's like, hey, we're going to get your box from point A to B significantly cheaper than the national guys. They're kind of carving out niches that they can, or lanes they can operate more efficiently, and therefore like offer lower prices on. But there's also the alternative, which is like, hey, we're going to double down on service. Like we may not be that much cheaper, but we're going to like make sure we get the boxes there on time based on whatever SLA is, and that may be faster than what the national carriers could do. When does it make sense for you guys? I know obviously like SLAs are important. How do you think about paying for changes to your strategy? Like when does it make sense for you to like go with a cost that is like a solution that may be higher in cost, but is going to be more reliable? How do you manage the economics there?
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have a lot of data. We're very much a data-driven company. We utilize a lot of different places that we can measure from to try to figure out what the overall impact is on our customer and like their experience with our brands and our products. So we have a lot of insight into like the overall ordering patterns based on delivery performance. So maybe we're in a better spot than some smaller shippers to truly be able to quantify and understand like what is the cost of a delay of a box being delivered a day late. What is the cost of a box going completely undelivered? It doesn't make it there at all. What does that translate to as far as the customer's experience? Does it increase attrition? Like, does it overall damage the brand? Like, if we picked a partner that was asset light and didn't meet our expectations, like what has that done to overall brand perception? We measure a lot of that. And so we do that through a lot of different avenues, but ultimately that's true for every shipper. Like you just may not
Yeah,
fully quantify exactly where those costs are and what they are, but they're higher than people think. Final mile
sure.
parcel delivery, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's the last step, the last impression that your brand is leaving on that customer. So I think that those are it is a trade-off that I think everybody's making, whether they're consciously making it or not. But for us, the short-term cost is what you pay for the shipment, but all of those externalities, all of those extra costs are the total cost of that shipment. And
Yeah.
so,
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think just kind of playing it back, I mean, if you're an enterprise shipper, you have the shipment volume to be able to at least, try and draw some trends out of the data to evaluate what's happening. What does the attrition look like? What is the impact of delay, non-delivery, et cetera, on your customers? And if you're not using that sort of second order cost data to also contribute to your cost conversation, you're probably missing something pretty big. So I think,
yes.
yeah, like I've seen people kind of go down this trap before where, it's cost always is going down, down, down to the floor. Because on the other end of the equation, if you're simply looking at like um, the P&L of your shipping and saying, hey, like I'm charging X for my shipping and I'm netting, or my costs are Y, like what am I winning or losing on shipping costs? And you're not factoring the cost of, retention/attrition, then you're missing a major component of that equation.
Yeah. And we're talking in terms of enterprise shippers, like you have data, you should be reviewing it. But even mid-size shippers, even small shippers, like even if it's a survey after an order, like you should be trying to
Yeah.
quantify, like what experience are you providing? it's an important data point.
Yeah. That makes sense. Another variable that probably is more relevant for enterprise shippers is like the cost associated with abandoning a national carrier that you may have volume commitments, specific, revenue tiers or like contract obligations, like walking away from some of those things in exchange for, maybe some of these other shit. Is it all still part of the same financial or economic equation in your mind? Are you looking at those the same way and saying like, hey, this is just cost of doing business? Or are you like, hey, maybe we ride some of these out and then make a change? Like, how do you weigh those things in your mind?
It's a really good point. And there's additional factors and variables like the propensity of a customer to blame a brand that they recognize instead of yours. If a national carrier makes a mistake as opposed to a regional carrier, and how much damage that will do to your brand. But to your point, it is all part of a larger equation. Like it really is coming down to managing a strategy, and a longer term strategy is always going to be more cost effective than a short term strategy. So if you're thinking about diversifying a carrier mix, like a lot of times that is something that you do as part of a multi-year directional move. It's not something that one week you decide like I'm no longer a single source shipper and now I've got five
Yeah.
carriers in my mix. It's you want to plan towards it. You want to fully understand the implications of what it does to your contract. You want to time it to, expirations of terms. And when you can renegotiate, you want to really like dial in exactly what it is that you're trying to accomplish and make sure that you have a cohesive long-term strategy. To your point, like there are a lot of aspects when it comes to managing a carrier mix, and it's like the pure cost. And to your point, like of very traditional national carrier contracts. They are, 50 plus pages of boilerplate language. And there are a lot of clauses and things in there that you want to make sure you fully understand before, embarking down a path that you don't really understand what the trade-offs are that you're making. But in the long run, I think there's opportunity for almost every shipper to find a way to add that redundancy to really define what it is that you want out of those carrier relationships, and then to align your contracts, align your carrier mix to deliver that.
Yeah, I think especially with growing, if your business is growing, you should be able to
Oh
like do
yeah.
this by way of your growth, right? Like your growth is going to fund exploration with other carriers. Typically, if you're in a business that's moving up and to the right, maybe a little more challenging with businesses that are going the other direction. But yeah, hopefully
But
that
let's
that's
be
the
honest,
case with.
that's the point where the conversation really sharpens. So a lot of times that's when people
Yeah,
are
that's fair
making
too.
those decisions. So like I think that there's opportunity in both.
Yeah, that makes sense. You talked a little bit about the partnership that you have with your carriers and the conversations that you have for planning purposes and everything else. Tell me about like the other side of that equation, like the governance side. Like how are you measuring their performance? What are the things that you're looking for? And like, do you have a scorecard by carrier? Like what are the things you're doing to keep track of carrier performance and just make sure that they're checking the boxes for you?
It's actually a really good question. And it's one that I think that far too often, especially people that are early in their carrier diversification journey, sidestep. And they think that, well, the lever that I have to improve performance right now is just shift volume. I'm going to bounce it between carriers. I'm struggling in Pittsburgh right now with carrier A. I'll just move it to carrier B. And it's difficult on the partnership, but it's also like it's a costly way to manage it makes it more difficult to follow your strategy and hit tiers. And it also really, a lot of times it hides the faults. It's like sweeping like the problems under the rug. So you never actually get to the root cause of them. Candidly, and this is not just at HelloFresh, but almost every place I've ever worked, that it's very easy to blame a final mile parcel carrier network for opportunities in service
Sure.
that quite frequently are your fault, for lack of a better, like your
Yeah,
outbound dock quality is not where it needs to be, or your labeling
totally.
process is off. So we do use a carrier scorecard methodology. We have weekly performance syncs. We make sure that there are very open channels of communication, regardless of the structure. It's funny, some of our carrier partners have established performance management criteria and cycles, and others we are talking a foreign language when we start working together. But we have established like a baseline. And we do like send out like, hey, based on the boxes that we gave you, this is our expectations. This is how you're performing. This area has an opportunity. And then we work together collaboratively to solve those problems. And sometimes it's us,
That's
sometimes
awesome.
it's them.
Yeah. I'm sure they like that. I mean, it feels like something that, like, if I were them, I would appreciate the feedback just because otherwise you don't know, the impact of your sale, especially if you're in sales or something else within you're not like rubber, they're not where the rubber meets the road. So it's helpful for them to be able to pull some of that back and have those conversations probably and improve their businesses.
Yeah, overall, it's even funny, national networks that we have highlighted opportunities in their transit files and their network planning, and they're like that nobody else is pointing out. So I do think that like overall we're improving performance for all of their
Totally.
customers. But yes, it's that old adage, feedback is a gift. Sometimes you don't want to receive. So some days it's fine.
Fair.
Some days it's rough.
Yeah. I love your point too about like the operational impact internally. Like we've seen that too within a lot of the data on the audit side of the house and on claims and everything else. It's more about like, I don't know, like the vast majority of things that we surface in terms of opportunities for folks tend to be maybe on the customer side operationally rather than like opportunities on the carrier side. Like there's a lot of cleanup and there's a lot of data and process that can be improved potentially internally before you look externally to try and fix some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best part about having solid partners too, is that they'll give you that feedback back. Like, hey, your pallets keep coming tipped over, or you're always holding up our driver and they're not ready on time. It's good feedback for us.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. In terms of choice between, I don't know, let's call it a national, like end to end carrier, that frankly, like there's like a few of them at this point, UPS's, FedEx's, USPS's of the world, and then regionals who don't have maybe injection everywhere. How do you decide how to route through one of those two networks? Like, is it simply a cost decision? Is it footprint? Like, what are the factors that, like geographic risk? Like, what are some of the things that you're thinking about when it comes to making a decision to route through a regional network versus a national network?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it all boils down to cost and quality, but there are a few different areas that are a little bit more relevant to a big like medium-sized enterprise shipper network that may not factor into a lot of other folks, and are probably very specific to a perishable shipper. We use reefer trailers for all of our product. We keep it, you know, cold chain for as long as we possibly can. We want to make sure that our gel packs are in the best possible conditions to be able to withstand, up to 48 hours out in ambient temperatures. And we have found that we get a lot more success by packaging for a traditional carrier network instead of trying to get a carrier network that will temperature control, for instance. So
Gotcha.
it's something that, other geographies around the world have different options, or it's much more condensed, or you can have a refrigerated delivery truck. In the US, it's not a widely available option. So we go the other way. In that
Yeah.
we have, middle mile trucks that we are sending sometimes, 36, 38-hour runs. And we want to make sure that we're maximizing those as much as possible. So a big factor for us is coverage and like how many
Yeah.
boxes can you deliver for us on any given day? And can we fill a truck to get them to you in that coverage? Utilization is a big part of our costs and quality equation. Ultimately, like that final delivery performance is probably the biggest impact, because if I give you 1,000 boxes and you only deliver 800 of them on time, it doesn't matter how many boxes you say you can cover. I can pay anybody to not deliver boxes. So I think that's probably the highest factor for us, or highest priority factor. We do look at some other things too, like overall delivery availability, like how many days a week do you offer? We have a pretty definite demand curve too, where, customers want their meals at the beginning of the week. They're planning for the week in advance. And so Sunday, Monday, Tuesday seems to be a heavy preference for our customers. That's the sort of thing that we would factor in as well. How many boxes can you deliver on Sunday? Do you even deliver on Sunday? Those are some other factors that determine that too.
That makes sense. And you mentioned packaging. Packaging is an interesting component of this whole equation as well. Like especially in perishables where you're factoring how long is this going to be temperature controlled, potentially after the SLA, because, you need to plan for something. So how do you guys think about that? Or how do you think about planning for a carrier gives you an SLA? Are you going over by a certain amount of time in terms of what you expect your package to be, you know, non-spoiled for? Like how much coverage are you planning for?
We have a really fantastic packaging team that do a lot of testing to make sure that we're protecting our product for our customers on whatever that journey might entail. But they use a lot of different data sources to try to make the right decisions. They look at like overall destination temps in the projected delivery days by zip code. We have some variability in the packaging that we can utilize in each box, from very thin or no liners at all to extra ice packs and very thick liners, heavy insulation. The capabilities are pretty wide, and so we are constantly tweaking and adjusting that packaging mix to make sure that whether we're delivering to Phoenix, and we need that, like, we also, to take a step back, package for the worst case scenario. Like we
Sure.
intend for the box to deliver on the day that we are targeting, but we know that there are access issues, there are driver capacity issues, there are a plethora of things that can come up when it's outside of four walls. And so we package for an extra day of transit. Like, assuming that it's
Yeah.
Tuesday
Okay.
and it doesn't deliver, we package so that it can still be protected and deliver on Wednesday.
That
So
makes sense. Are
a
you
lot of
looking at
variables.
are you or they, the packaging team, looking at carrier performance and evaluating their performance to sort of inform your decisions about like how much to pack based on that SLA? Like, I guess point being, like, carrier A has 99.9%, delivery, carrier B has 97%. Does packaging change for that carrier B scenario?
It's a really good question. Ultimately, on our side, we don't. My and my team are held to a very high standard of making sure that we deliver, 99% and above across all of our carriers, so that we don't have
Okay.
to make those kinds of decisions. But
Yeah.
ultimately, even though like 99 out of 100 boxes don't run into an issue and deliver on the day we expect, we still package every box for an extra day of transit, regardless, just
Got
to
it.
make sure.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Sort of big picture question for you, like zooming way out. If you were designing your carrier portfolio from scratch today, like open palette, you could do anything you want. Like, I think a lot of the reasons why we inherit some, obviously, like some limitations, right? Just based on where the business is. But if you could go back and be like, all right, if I could do it from scratch, what would you do differently in terms of your network design, if anything?
It's actually really an interesting question. And ultimately, I'm not positive. Like, at 4 years with HelloFresh now, I feel like we have done a lot to completely
Yeah,
reshape
yeah,
our
yeah.
carrier network into a vision that I can get behind. The flip side of that, though, I think that there are some lessons that I've learned along the way, that partnerships and leaning in and being a key partner for specific carriers, like, that's an area where we have seen huge amounts of success. So I think if I were to do it over again, I would have designed a higher redundancy network to begin with. I also think that you can look backwards and say, like, what were the potholes in the road? What were the things that you wish you had sidestepped along the way? And I think that there's plenty of those. Like, would I have negotiated a fuel surcharge caps into my contracts? Like, would I have been careful about variability and seasonality and made sure that we were protected against, whatever might happen? I think there's a lot of those questions that I think we potentially could have prevented impacts to our customers along the way. But would I redesign it from the ground up? I don't think so. I think that we have landed in a place that's really robust and actually doing a good job. And we got
Yeah.
there with all that historical baggage to begin with anyway. So I think that
It's amazing.
enterprise shippers, you can do it. Like, it's possible. You can get there.
Yeah, but obviously it's a testament to you and your team. Like, it requires a lot of hard work, a lot of very intentional, like, digging into the data, understanding the data and what's happening, like building relationships with all these carriers, like really investing in those partnerships in order to get it right. Like, I think the expectation that you can kind of set it and forget it is probably not the right approach here. There's a lot that can go wrong. There's a lot of oversight required to make sure that it's going to be, functional along the way. And like you said, it's fairly organic. Like things change a lot between, day to day, month to month, year to year in this market. So you really do have to stay like finger to the pulse on this.
I completely agree. And I would go so far as to say that it's easier to do now than it has been in the past. Like with the
That's fair.
proliferation of generative AI, with the resources that you have as far as like audit and oversight and like performance, you don't need a team of 100 logistics analysts anymore. Like you can get insight
Totally.
into your performance without that.
And I think the carrier's technology stack has gotten significantly better over the last few years. From what I've seen, I think it used to be very Wild West, like paper invoices flying around, things like that. But like, there's a lot of growing up that's happened over the last few years, and I think a lot of typical label gen systems. I mean, most of them have APIs now where you can plug into to gen labels and get data that you need. Um, that's the way the world's going. I mean, obviously, at some point they're going to get there, but it's to the point now where I think you mentioned this earlier. It's fairly easy to plug a new carrier into whatever system you're using to generate labels because they all know that that's the game they have to play.
Yes.
So that part operationally has been made a lot easier recently. And then I think to your point, the on the back end, looking at the data, managing strategy, there's so many tools out there to help you organize your data and keep tabs on it and figure out where there might be anomalies that pop up.
And
So
opportunities.
yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
optimize? How do you realize that you need another carrier partner? Like, how do you look at that data? To your point, there are a lot of tools. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at it. I think that the next frontier is going to be an opportunity for our carriers to differentiate themselves a little bit from the pack in like overall final mile innovation. I've seen some really interesting ideas pitched around about, apartment complexes and how do we get better at getting the delivery to the right spot for exactly what the customer is looking for. I think there's still plenty of opportunity for carriers to differentiate. There for tools to help shippers decide what the right thing to do is, but there's actually a lot of movement and innovation in the space too.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time to be in like scaled logistics, just with all of the AI and robotics innovations, like all of these things are making things more efficient, like easier to manage at scale. There's a lot of like tools that are really, I think, coming to the surface right now that are going to be really useful. And like one of the things that's daunting for me is like I feel like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I had pretty clear visibility into what the future of this. Like you could kind of trace the path. All right, this is how things are progressing. This is where it's going. Man, I don't know what 3 years out is going to look like just with the speed and momentum that these tools have. There's a lot that's changing. And I just know it's going to be a lot more efficient and there's going to be a lot more visibility than what we have today.
Way more control as a shipper. You
Yeah,
just you're in the driver's seat.
it's a good place to be for sure. But better than playing the whack-a-mole game, trying to just go through and like manage by exception.
Exactly. Definitely true.
Awesome. Well, good, Tanner. This has been great. We're at time, but I really appreciate you coming on today. It's been wonderful chatting with you as always, and I appreciate your perspective on all these issues. And hopefully, this helps some folks out there gain some perspective. Maybe they'll take some tips away from it. And yeah, just really appreciate you and your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. All right. Take care.